So this is a very exciting time to be a Marvel fan. We've got Avengers Endgame coming out at the end of April, which is going to be the last film in this era of the MCU. Captain Marvel just came out, which established one of the most powerful characters in the MCU. And then Spider-Man Far From Home is going to be the beginning of the new era of the MCU. But right now I'm doing this series of videos to lead up to Avengers Endgame, because this was a huge cinematic event that's been 11 years in the making, and I really consider myself a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When I started this YouTube channel, The Real Mr. Robinson, the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies in Phase 1 were the first movies I ever reviewed leading up to Iron Man 3. And now that we have Avengers Endgame coming out, I figured now's the best time to not only revisit the Phase 1 Marvel movies, but the entire franchise altogether. So rather than doing this in the order they were made, I'm going to do these reviews in chronological order and see how they actually fare out if you watch the series in chronological order. So with that long introduction out of the way, let's get into Captain America: The First Avenger came out in July of 2011, stars Chris Evans, Hayley Atwell, Tommy Lee Jones, Stanley Tucci, Sebastian Stan, and Hugo Weaving, and is the origin story of Captain America. So with this series of reviews, I'm not going to do any plot descriptions. I'm just going to dive right into the movie, talk about what I liked, didn't like, and see how they've stood the test of time, because I've already done reviews for the entire MCU on this channel beforehand, including Captain Marvel. You can go check out those reviews right now. I'll keep those reviews up for you guys to see, because it'll be interesting to see what I thought of them back then versus how I think of them right now. And with Captain America: The First Avenger, I love this movie. The summer of 2011 was probably one of the most exciting summers for me, or at least the most memorable, because you had this, Thor, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, even Transformers: Dark of the Moon, which is a total piece of shit, but I remember being excited for it because I just wanted to see a good Transformers movie. Boy, was I naive. But out of all the movies to come out in that summer, The First Avenger was the one that I was probably looking forward to the most, because I was completely invested in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and super interested to see what they could do with some of these characters. And Thor looked like it had the potential to be okay or good. I'll get into that movie later. But with The First Avenger, I was more excited to see it because it just seemed more interesting to me, because I knew about that old Captain America movie from the 90s that was absolutely horrible. So I was really curious to see if this movie would end up being bad, or if it could possibly make Captain America a cool character. And if you've seen my list of my top 100 favorite movies of all time, you know the answer to that, because this is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I think it all has to deal with the film's hero, Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans. For me, this is a superhero origin movie that ranks right up there with Richard Donner's Superman, Batman Begins, Iron Man, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. It just does a fantastic job at setting up Steve Rogers as Captain America. He may seem like a Boy Scout. I mean, that's usually what people think of when they see Captain America, I guess before the movies came out. But he's not afraid to stand by his beliefs and just do what's right. One of my favorite lines in the movie is when he meets Stanley Tucci's character for the first time. And when Dr. Erskine asks Steve Rogers, "Do you want to kill Nazis?" his response is, "I don't want to kill anyone. I just don't like bullies, no matter where they're from." And that's something to really admire about this character. Even if there's so many obstacles in his way, even if there's so many people to tell him, no, or you're not good enough. Hell, one of the very first scenes in this movie is him getting his ass beat because he told somebody who was being loud in a movie theater to just shut up. And he didn't run away. He kept wanting to get up and fight, even though he's a weakling, and he just stands there like, I could do this all day. So that's something to really admire. And with the military training sequence, you get a real sense of Steve Rogers' endurance. And there are two moments in that sequence that really stick out to me in terms of who this guy is. The first one is when all the soldiers are instructed to grab this flag, and they might get a ride back with Agent Carter, instead of just having to run all the way back to the base. And everyone's instinct is to just run up that pole and try to grab the flag. None of them can do it. So once everyone's done, everyone's given up, Steve Rogers just walks up to the flagpole, pulls a little pin out of it, which makes the pole fall down, folds up the flag, gives it to the drill sergeant, and just goes on his way on the truck. So that really goes to show you that even though Steve Rogers might not be the strongest person, hell, even amongst the Avengers later on, he's not the strongest, but he is the smartest. There's a reason why he is the leader of the Avengers more so than Tony Stark's Iron Man. And the other scene in this movie that really emphasizes how great of a character he is with the dummy grenade. Tommy Lee Jones plays Colonel Phillips, and he's arguing with Dr. Erskine on why he would even consider Steve Rogers because he's such a weakling. And Erskine just responds with, "I'm looking for traits beyond the physical," and that he doesn't want to bully. And Colonel Phillips just says, "You don't win niceness with war, you win wars with guts." So he throws a dummy grenade. Everyone scatters except for Steve Rogers, who goes on top of the grenade, curls up, and tells everyone to get back because he's just going to absorb the blow. And it's a dummy grenade. And that was just the ultimate test to prove that even though Steve Rogers at this point is a sick little weakling, he has guts. He is not afraid to put himself on the line for the greater good. And once he actually becomes the super soldier and takes on the identity of Captain America, he never forgets those morals. He uses the serum's power to his advantage to basically become Captain America. And the way they introduce the costume is just brilliant. A lot of people criticize this scene for being cheesy, but I think it's so inspired to have a big musical scene like this that montages how Steve Rogers even got the costume, how he became this American icon, and how they actually utilized this silly looking costume into a really badass uniform. And man, do they get the shield down in this movie. And it also plays into the idea again that Steve Rogers might not be the strongest, but he is the smartest guy, because the way he throws the shield, he makes sure to throw it at something where it can bounce off and he can catch it, or he knows it's going to hit its target. And it's just so cool. I remember seeing this movie for the very first time in 3D, because that was the only option that I had, and it was one of those post-conversion 3D movies that actually looked damn good. The opening scene of the movie where they enter the Red Skull's ship and there's some snow falling, it looked really good, and they really utilized the 3D when it comes to the shield. Sometimes I was just ducking whenever the shield came towards the camera. It was great. Now, of course, you already have the hero Steve Rogers, but what about the villain? What about Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, played by Hugo Weaving? I don't think he's one of the best Marvel villains, but I think he's one of the underrated Marvel villains out there, because he was one of the first people to take Dr. Erskine's super soldier serum, and we showed that he was really a bad dude, and it just made him worse, because his face just got deformed to where he actually has a red skull, which sometimes the makeup looks really good, and it's really expressive, and at other times it just looks pretty fake. Sometimes to the point where it just looks like rubber, plain and simple. But the character, I think, is a good parallel to Steve Rogers, because the Red Skull is a perfect example of somebody who has power and abuses it, versus somebody who has power but manages to stay a good man. And they don't get a whole lot of screen time together, but I think the hero-villain dynamic works pretty well. Now, as for the supporting cast, I already mentioned Tommy Lee Jones, who pretty much plays Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, that's what you get him for. I mentioned Stanley Tucci as Dr. Erskine, and the dynamic he has with Steve Rogers and the chemistry that the actor has with Chris Evans is pretty good as well. He basically is the mentor to Steve Rogers, and it's through his pep talks right before the operation where Steve Rogers is able to really maintain that moral of stay a good man. And Stanley Tucci is always so likable in movies regardless. And then you also have Dominic Cooper as a young Howard Stark, Tony's dad, and he's perfect. He is an excellent Howard Stark, and you really believe that yeah, this man is Tony's father. Some of the Howling Commandos are a lot of fun, especially Dum Dum Dugan. Sebastian Stan as Bucky is really good in this movie, and even with the little bit of screen time that Bucky and Steve share in this movie, you buy into their friendship. And it's really funny to see their roles flipped once Steve Rogers actually becomes Captain America. But for me, the big standout in terms of your supporting cast is Hayley Atwell as Peggy Carter. I really feel like that Peggy Carter is the point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe where the lead actress should be more than just a love interest. I'll address that more when I get to Iron Man and Thor, but Peggy Carter has a great introduction. She walks up and is basically giving the group of soldiers that Steve is a part of a little pep talk. One of them decides to become a real smartass, so Peggy asks him to step forward, put his right leg forward, and then she just punches him. And it also really emphasizes how Peggy is not just your love interest for Captain America. She is a badass. She can handle things on her own. I just really love this character. I'm actually so glad that they've given a lot for Peggy to do within the MCU. Whether it was the very minor roles that she had in the sequels, the short film that came with the Iron Man 3 Blu-ray, or her short-lived TV series, I'm so glad that they utilized Peggy for more than just this movie. Now, even though this is one of my top 100 favorite movies of all time, and I absolutely love it, I did have some issues with the movie. In my Captain Marvel review, I talked about how it reminded me very much of this movie for better and for worse. I want to specify what I mean by that. I feel like my opinions for the beginning and middle of the film are reversed when it comes to both these movies. So in my Captain Marvel review, if you heard me say that the beginning of the first Avenger was a little slow, I was talking about Captain Marvel. I may have phrased that incorrectly, so let me elaborate. I wasn't too fond of the slow opening for Captain Marvel, but I thought it just kept getting better as it goes along. And with the first Avenger, I thought it started off pretty strong, and then in the middle of the movie, it kind of follows a drag. There's one sequence in this movie that kind of doesn't work out for me, and that's the big montage once Steve Rogers gets the better uniform, gets the shield, and he and the Howling Commandos go off to take out all these Hydra facilities. And it just feels rushed. It feels like we could have spent a little time with this, but it's just like, nope, gotta montage this. We gotta rush it to the finale. We gotta rush it to a point where Hydra's really taking this threat seriously. And we gotta rush killing Bucky Barnes, or killing him to set him up as the Winter Soldier in future installments. And I just feel like it could have been handled a little better. But I think very much like Captain Marvel, the end of the movie, the third act, is great. And it's just one of these things where it's like, yeah, it started off good, it drags a little bit in the middle, and they just rush that montage. But the ending is really good. That's when the action really gets kick-ass. That's when you're really pulling for Steve Rogers to come in and save the day. And it actually is emotionally powerful for me. The end of the movie, after Schmidt is, well, not dead, because we know that he ends up becoming the Stone Keeper for the Soul Stone, but when he's basically teleported up into space and Steve Rogers has to crash the plane, it's powerful. Hearing Steve Rogers and Peggy on the mics going back and forth, basically comforting each other, knowing that Steve Rogers is probably not going to make it out of this, is heartfelt. And it's funny because I've been familiar with the 1990 movie, and the way they did the sequence where he gets frozen in the ice and is awakened decades later is silly. It's just downright laughable. So I was wondering how they were going to do it in this movie, and I'll be damned if they made it work. The ending really is great, and when I first saw this movie in the theaters, I could not wait to watch it again. I loved it that much. Out of all the solo movies in Phase 1 leading up to the Avengers, this is my second favorite. It's action-packed, it's got a great origin story, it's clever at points, the supporting cast is great, your hero's phenomenal, it has a great old 1940s serial feel to it, sort of like the Indiana Jones movies, which the director Joe Johnston did work on, and if nothing else, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, so I really dig it. My rating is still the same when I first reviewed this movie. Get off your ass and go see it right now. I think this movie is greatly underappreciated, and sure, there are better MCU movies out there, and the Captain America sequels are better than this one, but I think this one definitely needs to be revisited. If you haven't seen this movie in a while, give it another shot. You'll like it a lot. So there you go, that's Captain America, the First Avenger. The next movie on this list is going to be Captain Marvel. And as soon as I finish recording this review, I'm on my way to see Captain Marvel again and in IMAX. So I'm going to post my spoiler review, aka part 2 of this chronological recap, on Monday. So until then, I want to know what you guys think about the First Avenger. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.